Welcome, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Beek. I coordinate adult education programs here at Trees Atlanta. I'm here with my amazing colleague, Quinn. Um,
Hello.
yes, hi, Quinn, and also Amanda from the Amphibian Foundation. We are just so thrilled that you guys are here with us today for our Ask the Expert about creating amphibian-friendly spaces in the city and the forest. For those of you all who are not familiar with Trees Atlanta, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect and improve the urban forests throughout Atlanta. And we do this through planting trees throughout the Atlanta metro area, and this is a great time to get involved with planting trees. Also, incredible conservation projects. There are people, volunteers and staff, and many partners that are working to conserve and restore the forests that we do have in the city and the forest constantly. And please sign up for some of their projects as well, and also educational programs such as today's. And you can learn more about all the fun and wonderful ways to connect with your community and be a part of this mission by visiting our website. Our amazing partners at the Amphibian Foundation are also here, and they're also a partner on this presentation. And they are a nonprofit organization dedicated to connecting individuals, communities, and organizations in order to create and implement lasting solutions to the global amphibian extinction crisis. And they are doing such incredible work, from their camps to their research to their conservation efforts, including today's educational program. And I encourage you to check out more about their incredible work and get involved with their organization, and check out all they do on their website. The Amphibian Foundation and Trees Atlanta is really thankful for our sponsors for today's program, the City of Atlanta. They enable us to create programs that are free for all of us today. And most of all, we are so excited that you all are here. We really appreciate you being here. I know all the amphibians and all the trees are very appreciative of people like you. To make today's experience as wonderful as possible, we ask that you all remain on mute, but we do invite you to drop any questions that you might have into the chat. And Quinn and I are working together to make sure that we can pass along those questions to our expert, Amanda, today. And if we happen to run out of time, we will follow up in writing. The recording will be on YouTube within a week. And then it helps both Amanda and our education team do better jobs in the future if you all give us honest feedback in the surveys that we will send out after today's presentation. So thank you for doing that. This is part of a series about trees and animals that are part of our City Forest Certification Program. And if you love today's virtual presentation and you're inspired to learn more, we have a great field trip with Trees Atlanta, Sav, who I think is on today, and also Amanda, who's on today, and also some friends at Birch, Georgia. And we'll be taking a walk through Clyde Shepherd Nature Preserve right here, and look at everything from the forest floor to the canopy, and look about things we can all do to help support our wildlife and trees. And we also have a great Georgia Arbor Month speaker, Dr. Doug Ptolemy. And at this event, in addition to this great speaker, we have resources like the Amphibian Foundation and other partners who are all working together to help support trees and wildlife. You can learn more about the City Forest Certified program by taking a picture of this QR code, or just Googling City Forest Certified at Trees Atlanta. There are so many incredible resources. We'll go into those more later, but we also have an amphibian stewardship track, and I encourage you, if you're inspired by what you learned from Amanda today, to check out that track. You can learn more by following us on social media, signing up for an email, or going to our website. And now I get to introduce our incredible speaker. I was just learning that Amanda grew up in Decatur. She actually used to be walking, you might have found her walking her snake around the neighborhood, but she has gotten involved with the Amphibian Foundation first as a counselor. And today she is now an education coordinator and lab manager with the Amphibian Foundation. She has the coolest things on her website. I mean, on her resume. She's a master herpetologist in the Southeast. She's a level 1 venomous snake handler. I mean, such a cool woman. And she's very passionate about ecological education and outreach, especially when it comes to animals that are typically considered gross or scary. And with that, I'd like to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to our expert, Amanda.
Thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and share my screen now. All right. So first things first, guys, I want to just give a brief overview of our amphibians, kind of what these animals are that we are talking about. So some of you may already have a background in some knowledge of amphibian biology and ecology, but I still just want to give a little bit of that info just to make sure we all know how wonderful these animals are that we want to encourage in our homes and yards here in Atlanta. So first things first, amphibians are a class of animals similar to, say, mammals or birds. So amphibians are a class and reptiles are a class. So we're just going to focus on amphibians today. And we do split that class Amphibia into 3 orders. So the first and most familiar order is going to be Anura. This is the order of frogs. Next, we have the order Caudata. This is the order of salamanders. And this is actually where we have some really, really incredible diversity here in the Southeast. Finally, we have a third order, Gymnophiona, the Sicilians. This is not a group of amphibians that we're going to find in North America at all, so we're really not going to focus on them today, but I just wanted you guys to know that there is this incredible third group of amphibians out there in the world as well. Now, the unfortunate thing is that amphibians are disappearing globally. So one thing you might have seen in the Amphibian Foundation's mission statement at the beginning of this presentation is that we are dedicated to trying to help end this global amphibian extinction crisis. And that's something that most people don't even realize is happening. But amphibians are threatened, declining, or going extinct at a rate that far exceeds most other animal groups. Of the over 8,800 known species of amphibians throughout the world, 43% are known to be in catastrophic decline or potentially extinct in the wild. Another 32%, we do have data saying that their populations are considered stable, but that leaves 25% where we just don't have the data to know how their populations are doing. So that does actually leave the door open for potentially up to 2/3 of our amphibian species to be in that state of decline because there are so many that we just aren't able to gather that data. A lot of amphibians are very secretive and just hard to find in the wild, which makes it very difficult to gather this data for a lot of species. Now, since we're talking about such a massive number of amphibians, 43% in decline represents a simultaneous loss of over 3,700 species from global ecosystems. And that number is actually larger than the number of threatened or declining species of mammals and birds combined. So there are a lot of things going on that contribute to our amphibian declines. So that is one thing I want to kind of focus on today, since we're talking about how to create spaces that are going to be welcoming to amphibians. If we're trying to encourage amphibians to come into our yards, our parks, our green spaces, we need to be aware of things that are harmful for them, things that we can avoid, because that's one of the biggest points I'm hoping to make for you guys today. It's less about what can we add to attract them, because they're already here. It's more about how can we make sure we don't have these negative things that are driving them away. Of course, a big one is habitat alteration. We do have some amphibian species that we're going to see, I mean, even like in the middle of Atlanta, that are pretty willing to be in any area. They're pretty flexible with their habitat. But when we are just destroying this habitat, we're taking away any place that these animals have to live, to hunt, to breed, then of course we're going to lose those species. Harvest is an issue. We do see collection and poaching of these animals for the pet trade. Not so much here in the United States, but in other countries, we do also see them being hunted for food or for medicinal purposes as well. Invasive species is a very big issue that we see with threats to our amphibians. Things like invasive species bringing disease, invasive species competing for habitat, competing for food, competing for shelter. So this is something that we have to worry about a lot with our amphibians. Acidification of the environment and environmental contaminants. I'll talk a little bit more about that on a later slide, but amphibians are sometimes referred to as kind of the canary in the coal mine of uh, environmental issues because they are very, very sensitive beyond most other animals. We're going to see environmental issues affect amphibians sooner than we would see that for, say, reptiles, mammals, or birds. And we'll get into why they're so sensitive in a minute. Now, a big one here in kind of a city area is outdoor pet and feral cats. Outdoor cats kill up to 1 billion amphibians annually in the United States, whether this is a pet cat or a feral cat. So that's a big thing that I always tell people is I just very, very strongly encourage that, if you have a pet cat that is allowed outside, that you rethink that. Keeping them indoors protects the cat and it protects the animals that, even if they're well fed, they're still going to hunt for fun. So that's a big way that we can protect amphibians in our yards. A very, very big concern with amphibian declines is emergent infectious disease. There is unfortunately a fungal disease called chytridiomycosis, we call it chytrid for short, that has pretty much made its way around the world. And again, we'll talk more about the sensitivity of amphibians in just a minute, but amphibian skin is incredibly crucial to their health. Amphibians are drinking their water through their skin, and many of them are even breathing through their skin. And what chytridiomycosis does, this fungus effectively eats their skin. And so it is absolutely devastating, especially in tropical areas. We've seen just incredible devastation to amphibian populations. And unfortunately, we do have chytridiomycosis here in Georgia as well. So one thing I like to encourage people that are going out and looking for amphibians, they're going what we call herping, trying to find them, to see them because they love them, is to be mindful of biosecurity, things like sanitizing shoes when you go between areas, sanitizing tools that you might be using, just to minimize the risk of spreading these diseases. And then, of course, climate-related impacts. When we're seeing changes to bodies of water, changes to temperature, we start to see a lot of difficulties for our amphibians because some of them are very, very reliant on specific breeding habitats. So here is just a broad example of an amphibian life cycle that we might see. We're using a salamander as an example, specifically a terrestrial and salamander, such as some species we might find in Metro Atlanta, like the spotted salamander or the marbled salamander. But there is a lot of variation and diversity in this life cycle. But just for kind of a big picture, your most standard amphibian life cycle, we're going to start at the top with our terrestrial adult amphibian that's going to lay eggs in or near a body of water. Amphibian eggs are not like what you might picture when we talk about eggs. We think of a bird egg with a hard shell or a reptile egg with a flexible leathery shell. Amphibian eggs are completely shellless. They're gelatinous, and you can actually see straight through them to the embryo developing inside. Then those eggs will typically hatch into an aquatic larvae. So for frogs, we would call that a tadpole. And then that larvae is going to grow in its aquatic form before going through metamorphosis, where it is going to lose its aquatic features. So in the case of a salamander here, we're losing those big frilly external gills and the tail fin and coming out onto the land as a terrestrial adult. Again, even here in Atlanta, there is a massive variety of life cycles, not just this one, but this is kind of a standard point of reference for salamanders and frogs. Now, here are some amphibian eggs that you might come across in the Atlanta area because they don't all look the same and they look weird and they might not always look like eggs. But these are some things that you might see in a stream, in a pond, under a rock or log, so that you can kind of know what you're seeing and know if you're seeing this, you're doing something right. because you've got amphibians not just present, but breeding. So in the top left corner, the lump in the person's hand, that is spotted salamander eggs. Now, these guys are really, really picky about where they'll breed. We'll get into that in another slide too. But they are very, very picky about the bodies of water in which they will lay their eggs. But it's going to be a bunch of individual eggs inside of typically about a baseball-sized clump of clear goo that holds them all together. Now, just below that is a similar image, but there's no kind of outer body to those eggs. Each individual egg is just stuck together in a clump. These are going to be frog eggs. Now, typically, this might be, say, green frogs or bullfrogs that we're going to see eggs like this. Some will also lay them in a flat sheet across the surface of the water, but they're not going to be connected in a ball quite the same way as our salamander eggs. Now in the middle, we have a string of eggs. This is the easiest type of eggs to identify. These are going to be toad eggs. Toads are our only amphibians that are going to lay their eggs in strings or strands. So you might sometimes see them in bodies of water kind of tangled around a stick, which is just helping keep them in place so they're not drifting downstream. And then we do have some salamanders that are going to lay terrestrial eggs, such as the two-line salamander in this photo. So these eggs might be under or even adhered to the bottom of a wet rock or log near a body of water. And of course, this is far from an exhaustive list, but just a little bit of an example of things you might see. Now, this is amphibian skin, and I've kind of alluded to the importance of amphibian skin already. This is a side view of amphibian skin under a microscope. So the pink line at the top is the actual surface of the skin that we would see if we were looking at the actual amphibian itself. One thing that might jump out at you immediately, but it's not really the big focus here, is the poison glands, those big pink things. Technically, all amphibians do have poison glands. Here in Georgia, our amphibians are typically not super toxic to humans. You know, don't lick them, don't put them in your mouth. But we don't have any amphibians that could harm you just through touch. So you don't have to worry about that. But we are going to see those mucus glands in between the poison glands and the outer edge of the skin. That's why our amphibians tend to seem wet or shiny. Those mucus glands keep their skin moist, which is actually necessary for our amphibians to be healthy and safe. So what we are going to see is typically wet, shiny amphibians in or near a body of water because they rely very heavily on moisture. We do have amphibians that can be found in really dry environments and deserts and things like that, but they are highly specialized to do things like burrow way down into the soil where they're going to be able to access more moisture. But what's super important about our amphibian skin is that it is what we like to call semi-permeable, meaning that some things are able to pass through their skin. Not all things, of course, but things like water, oxygen, electrolytes, chemicals. These are all substances that can actually pass through an amphibian's skin and directly into their bloodstream, okay? So our amphibians are actually going to drink water, not with their mouth, like we expect most animals to, but by sitting somewhere wet and absorbing water through the skin of their belly directly into their bloodstream. Now, this is where sensitivity to habitat issues comes in. Because if you've got a frog sitting in a polluted puddle of water, say there's an oil spill and that's the puddle of water that your frog is sitting in, that oil or whatever pollutants are in the water, maybe it's fertilizers from your neighbor's yard, those unfortunately are also going to be absorbed into that amphibian's skin. Now, amphibians are tough. I don't want you to take away from this that amphibians are, fragile, made of glass. They are tough, but they are sensitive to a lot of things that we don't necessarily expect animals to be sensitive to in such a way. Not only are they absorbing water through their skin to hydrate themselves, but a lot of our salamanders are actually going to breathe exclusively by absorbing oxygen through their skin. The largest family of salamanders, making up about 2/3 of all salamander species on Earth, and the majority of our salamanders here in Metro Atlanta are what we call the lungless salamanders, the family Plethodontidae. And they literally have no lungs. Instead, they are just absorbing oxygen from the air. or from the water in some cases through their skin and again directly into their bloodstream. So it can be very, very important for these animals to have access to, you know, uh, unpolluted areas because they are just so sensitive to these things. This is also something we have to think about when we're interacting with amphibians, because if, for example, you pick up a frog in the wild, and you've just put on bug spray or sunscreen, those chemicals can also pass through their skin and into their bloodstream. So I tend to like to tell people, it's always better to look and not touch unless it's something like this toad is in the middle of the road and is about to get hit by a car, then it's probably worth it. But we just want to be mindful and keep that in the back of our mind when we're interacting with these animals, that anything that touches them has the potential to affect their health and to affect their well-being through that semi-permeable skin. Now, another thing that is important to think about when we are discussing habitat and specifically breeding habitat for our amphibians is that some of our amphibians are obligated to breed in ephemeral wetlands. So ephemeral wetlands are temporary bodies of water, sometimes also called vernal pools. These are basically puddles. They can be very, very large, but they are bodies of water that are going to consistently dry up for a portion of every single year. Now, a lot of amphibians will take advantage of these ephemeral wetlands when they can, but there are a handful, especially with our salamanders, that are obligated to breed in ephemeral wetlands. They won't breed anywhere else. The big thing that makes ephemeral wetlands so appealing for our amphibians is the lack of predation. If you think about it, these are more or less defenseless in many cases, eggs and aquatic larvae. Fish are the #1 predator that we're typically going to see for the eggs and larvae of our amphibians. So when we have an ephemeral wetland that we know is going to be completely dry for, say, 3 to 6 months out of every year, then we know that that is not a body of water that's going to sustain fish populations. So by breeding in these ephemeral wetlands, our amphibians can just eliminate the #1 predator of their eggs and larvae really, really easily. However, this adds some complications to their life cycle. Amphibians that are obligated to breed in ephemeral wetlands are going to be migratory amphibians because, again, this body of water is going to dry up, so it's not necessarily a permanent source of moisture and hydration for them. So what we're going to see is these amphibians will have an upland brumation site. Brumation is like the amphibian and reptile version of hibernation. It's not quite as intense. They're not necessarily going to go to sleep and stay asleep the whole winter, but they will kind of go into a more dormant state. They're going to spend typically about 50 weeks out of every year underground in this brumation site. They're going to come above ground when it's the appropriate breeding time for their species, and they are going to migrate from their brumation site to their breeding site. But let's think about that for a minute, because now we have these delicate animals that require not one, but two separate habitats that have to be healthy. They have to be safe. They have to be unobstructed. And we have animals that have to migrate between those sites. They have to go both directions every year. Typically for salamanders, we're going to see migrations up to 500 meters in length, and frogs can reach 1,500 meters. Now, when we're looking at an urban habitat, like here in Atlanta, unfortunately, there can be roadblocks, literally. There can be issues that occur with this migration, this mandatory migration. The example given here is that maybe a road has been built across this migration route between two migrations. Salamanders, unfortunately, don't understand what roads are. They don't know to look both ways. So there is a potential for very high road mortality during the migrations of our obligate ephemeral wetland breeding amphibians. And they're going to have to cross this route twice. They're going to have to go to their breeding site and then leave it again. Now, thankfully, there are some areas that are aware of large presences of migrating amphibians and will actually close certain roads on nights that they know there's going to be particularly high migration, but I'm not aware of anything like that here in Georgia. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. If you know what species of migratory amphibian might be present in your particular area, you can learn about the time of year that they're likely to be migrating and just kind of keep your eyes peeled. Maybe you can help a salamander cross a road and be the reason that it gets to breed that year. For example, the main migratory amphibians we're going to see here in Metro Atlanta would be our marbled salamanders, which are going to be active and breeding in late fall and early winter, and our spotted salamanders, which are going to be active and migrating in late winter and early spring. Now, this is a resource that I want to share with all of you guys. Now, I assume since this is an Atlanta-based organization that most, if not all, of the wonderful people watching right now are probably in the Atlanta area. If not, my apologies. But this website is actually a resource of the Amphibian Foundation, the organization I work for right now. And the website is up at the top there. It's www.maamp.us. That's the Metro Atlanta Amphibian Monitoring Program. This website actually has an ID guide for all 28 amphibian species that can be found within the 285 perimeter. Now, if you broaden that out into the state of Georgia as a whole, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. I will just tell you the guidebook to the reptiles and amphibians of the state of Georgia is like 1,000 pages long. We have absolutely incredible reptile and amphibian diversity in the state of Georgia. And in Metro Atlanta, within the 285 perimeter, where this is a hugely built up city, we still have 14 species each of frogs and salamanders that can be found, which is absolutely incredible. There are entire states, especially out west, with maybe 1, 3, 5 amphibian species across the entire state. This website is a great resource to help you identify what kind of amphibians you might be finding in your own backyard. It's going to have photos of the amphibians at all life stages. And for frogs, there are also really good high quality recordings of their calls so that you can help identify your frogs just based on the calls that you're hearing. We do also sometimes accept volunteers for amphibian monitoring programs. Now, I'm not directly involved in that aspect, so I can't speak as much to what is being looked for in that regard right now. But this is a website that I myself refer to pretty frequently still because it's just a great resource. Now, a big thing that I want to make sure everyone understands about our amphibians, when we're talking about their habitat, we're talking about creating suitable habitat for them to live in our areas, is that they are in the middle of the food chain. They are both predator and prey, and they play very important roles in both aspects, okay? When we're looking at larval anurans, so larval frogs are tadpoles, they are predominantly going to be what we call primary consumers. They are herbivores, they're eating algae and other vegetation while they're in the water. But when they go through metamorphosis, crazy things happen and they literally change their entire digestive system to go from an herbivorous animal to a fully carnivorous animal. Adult amphibians are exclusively carnivorous, except for one weird example in salamanders that we won't get into right now. But here in Metro Atlanta, all of our adult amphibians are going to be carnivores, predominantly insectivores, but anything that moves and fits in an amphibian's mouth is fair game. They are opportunistic carnivores and they will just kind of eat anything they can find. They actually play a very important role in managing proper insect populations. Any individual amphibian can eat about 5,000 insects a year. Now, you might think, oh, well, I only ever see 1 or 2 frogs in my yard. That doesn't mean there's only 1 or 2 frogs in your yard, though. A lot of the frogs that we have here in Georgia are hard to find. We have some tiny frogs. We have tree frogs that stay way up high where you can't see them. And we have frogs that just jump away really, really fast if you get anywhere near them. But you probably do have a much larger population in your own yard than you realize. So if we were to lose our amphibians, that could result in an unhealthy boom in insect populations. And while that could, increase pollinator counts and things like that, these are species that have co-evolved to keep each other in check. There is a specific healthy balance that these amphibians help maintain with our insect populations. Vice versa, we also see that our amphibians are delicious snacks to a lot of other predators. And so, again, they serve as a very important food source for a lot of animals. So, if we were to lose our amphibians, not only would we lose these predators that are keeping our insect populations in check, but we also could lose some main food sources for some of our animals that are higher up on the food chain that rely on amphibians for their survival as well. Now, finally, I want to show an example of something that we do here at the Amphibian Foundation. This is not necessarily something that is replicable or accessible to the average person. So that's not what I'm saying. Here's an example of what you should do in your own yard. But I want to show an example of an artificial habitat that has been built specifically to house amphibians. And not just any amphibians, this is a habitat that was built for ephemeral wetland breeding amphibians. Here at the Amphibian Foundation, our number one priority conservation species is the frosted flatwood salamander. This is an incredibly rare salamander species from the coastal plain of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina that has lost about 99% of its habitat and population in the last 30 years. So we have worked extensively to conserve this species. One of the ways we did that is by building what we call our mesocosms. This photo doesn't really give great size reference, but this is a cattle tank. This is an absolutely massive tub. And a team, now I will say the building of these was before I ever started working with the Amphibian Foundation. So I wasn't there in person to see this built, but a team actually went down to the coastal plain, to the longleaf pine ecosystem, and harvested the proper plants, the proper soil, the proper types of wood to build these mesocosms. And what you'll see is that there's water on one side, and there is actually a hill that slopes downwards into that water. And that is called the ecotone, that hill that goes down into the water. And that is where some of our ephemeral wetland breeding amphibians are going to lay their eggs. For example, here in Metro Atlanta, we have marbled salamanders. Some of you guys, if you're lucky, you may have gotten to see them in the wild around Atlanta. They're also a species that are going to use that ecotone to breed. They're going to breed at a time of year when their ephemeral wetland is actually dry. The mother salamander is going to deposit her eggs in a moist area, but not in the water, typically under a rock or a log. And she'll actually stay with them and guard them for a little while to protect them from predators and to just make sure they don't dry out. Then, when it's time for the wetlands to start filling with water, what's going to happen is the water creeps up the ecotone and submerges those eggs. The eggs are cued to hatch by the water filling the pond and covering those eggs. They're going to hatch out and go about their larval life before metamorphosis. So this is something that we're going to see as kind of an important aspect of breeding for some of our amphibians. Now, our obligate ephemeral wetland breeders, like our marbled salamanders and our spotted salamanders, are going to be much, much more difficult to attract to any given yard because they have really, really niche, specific habitat requirements. But we have a lot of amphibians here in the Atlanta area that are much less picky. We have some that don't even require a true body of water at all. For example, some of the most common amphibians to find in Metro Atlanta, in my personal experience, are the slimy salamander and the redback salamander. These are plethodontid or lungless salamanders, like I talked about earlier, so they're breathing exclusively by absorbing oxygen through their skin. They are also what we call direct developers. So if you think back to that amphibian life cycle that we looked at earlier with all those different steps, not everybody follows all those steps. Our direct developing salamanders skip the vast majority of them. Things like slimy and redback salamanders are just going to find a moist, kind of hidden spot under something like a log or a rock and lay their eggs there. The mom's going to leave. They don't typically stay and guard them in these species. And when the eggs hatch out, They're just tiny terrestrial salamanders. There's no aquatic larval stage and there's no metamorphosis. So these guys do need shelter. They do need, of course, small insects to eat, and they do need moisture, but they don't necessarily need a body of water. So if you are the type of person who is encouraging native plant life, who is encouraging, letting tree falls stay where they fall, leaving leaves where they fall, these are things that will encourage amphibians. It might seem like, oh, I need to build a pond if I want to have amphibians in my yard. And for some species, that is true, but that's not always the case. Even just having a yard that is going to attract native insects and provide shelter in the form of logs, rocks, leaves, that's all you need to attract some of our least picky amphibians. Now, if you do happen to have a creek in your backyard or near your backyard, now you've just opened up the door to a lot more species. A lot of these animals will travel a little ways to find food and to find shelter. So even if there's a creek, say a block from your house, you may still find yourself with toads and tree frogs and green frogs coming into your yard to look for shelter or to look for habitat, because not all of these animals are going to require staying right up at their water source all the time. So the biggest thing I can really say, the biggest takeaway I want you guys to get from the concept of how we can create amphibian-friendly spaces is a lot of it just comes down to the same types of things that a lot of you are probably already doing in your own yards if you're the type person that's here in this talk right now. Things like not spraying for mosquitoes, things like not having an outdoor pet cat, things like planting native plants and attracting pollinators, allowing our native insects to come into your yard and not trying to get rid of them, allowing shelter to remain for animals when a branch falls, when a tree falls, rotting logs, leaving rocks, things like that. That is the biggest thing you can do to create healthy habitat for amphibians. A lot of people will go as far as creating a frog pond in their yard, but that's not necessary. That's a big step that you absolutely can take, but there are much, much smaller, much more accessible steps that you can take and that a lot of you may already be taking to create amphibian habitat in your yard without even realizing it. All right. So that's the presentation that I have. So I will stop sharing my screen now and pass back over to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. And that was amazing. And Kayla and Stephen and others, you guys continue dropping in any questions you might have for our expert today into the chat. Really quickly though, I just want to share my screen. So can you all see the screen? Is everything working? Okay. So I want to just take a few minutes to chat about a really cool community action program that Trees Atlanta does in partnership with the Amphibian Foundation, Birds Georgia, and so many other amazing partners here in Atlanta to support our wildlife and also to support our trees. We really feel like there's some great practical knowledge and skills and tools that are part of this program. And if you've been inspired by Amanda, we'd love you to check some of them out. We have this belief that like collectively, all of us in our yards can really be growing this network of healthy forest, just property by property that can truly have an impact for some of the species like our amphibian neighbors. So when you if you Google City Forest Certified on the Trees Atlanta website, you're going to see that there's several different types of properties that you can certify. Almost anybody can participate, even if you have no yard. There are ways to earn acorns, such as volunteering with a group like the Amphibian Foundation or Trees Atlanta is a great way to get an acorn. Taking an educational class like you all are doing right now is a way to get an acorn. So even if you have no yard, there are things that you can be doing to get certified. Most of us are residential property owners. And if you are a residential property owner, you can just go to that picture and click it, and it opens up all these goals with all these amazing resources and so many like wonderful speakers and things like that that you can do in your own yard. And each time you can earn acorns. We also have community properties. So for example, this month, Herbert Taylor, the Wild Center, and several other communities, urban farms, gardens, churches, synagogues, schools. Those are examples of community property that could become certified. And then of course you have large properties. But you would go to each of these, figure out what your property is, click it, and it opens up to those resources. The cool thing about doing it is you get this beautiful sign, which is so cool, and it can inspire all these other neighbors. But it's also the incredible resources. Like we have people, colleagues of Amanda's from the Amphibian Foundation, sharing videos in there about ways you can make things you can do, like what Amanda has been sharing with us today for our amphibians or birds or others. So many great resources. You also get invites to special events. For example, we have a Georgia Arbor Day speaker, Dr. Doug Ptolemy. And before that, we're having a networking event for everybody who's become certified. So you guys can meet each other, get inspired, meet some of our partners like the Amphibian Foundation, Birds Georgia, Georgia Native Plant Society, and others, find out what their resources are and continue to grow and get more acorns for 2026. So I see like Debbie's on here. She already has a City Forest certification, but she might be on here and saying like 2026 is going to be the year I get my amphibian stewardship track or bird stewardship track or something like that. You also get 10% off of Trees Atlanta plant sales to continue to get materials for native plants to get those insects that make the amphibians happy or other species. And you're just making a huge difference in our community. I mean, most of the urban forest of Atlanta is on private property. So what we all do on our own sites can have a huge impact for species like amphibians. So when you go on, you just click what property that you're on. You're going to sign up. You can review all the different acorn possibilities and goals that you want to do for your property next. In addition to these online resources, you get to be with a very own live City Forest bud. I think Kayla is on this today. She's an example of the City Forest bud. They will come to your house and help you with those goals and acorns. And if you get 16 acorns, you get a garden plaque. But we don't want that to be where you start. Like every year is a great new chance to add more acorns through stewardship tracks. So this is an example of one. So you'll see these on the website and you can click like, I want to be birds, get a Birds Georgia one and click that and get their list. These are some of the ones: canopy cover, leaving the leaves, reducing your lawn, reducing your mowing, are some of the things that you can do to get acorns, to get your amphibian stewardship badge, and more. Volunteer with Amanda and their organization or Trees Atlanta. These are all things you can do. And I think I actually saw that Erin is on here, but I wanted to give a shout out to some of the people who have earned amphibian badges this year by creating amphibian friendly spaces. So this is Erin, and this is some of her spaces. And you can see that like she is actually seeing some of these amphibians coming to her space, and that is worth celebrating. So I really wanted to give a shout out to Erin and just say that this is possible for us to do in Atlanta. And another person that I wanted to give a shout out to who's earned their stewardship for amphibians is Laura. She actually is the only person that we know of yet who has earned every single badge possible for the City Forest certification. And I was just so in awe of, if you follow her on Instagram or look up her blog, she has so many great examples of things we can all do that certainly inspired me in my own yard. So I just wanted to shout these folks out, and just collectively, everybody who's become certified this year, like 127 acres you guys have certified. Like Over 4,000 acorns. Those are all little acts of love for amphibians and wildlife in our forest. So there's just such great work, and a huge shout out to all the certified community spaces, from the Wild Center to Lake Claire to parks, and gardens. So look at these friends of groups. So there's so many great people doing this. And yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing so you can ask our experts some questions. Let me see. And I have to just escape out of my screen really quickly so I can find the Q&A that Quinn has been putting together. Quinn, do you want to ask the first question while I'm trying to find that? I have one from Stephen. It said, he would love to know what can be done at home to promote amphibians around a wildlife pond or rain garden.
Nice.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you already have a wildlife pond, if you already have a rain garden, you're already attracting them. That's incredible to hear. I would say basically some of the biggest things are going to be shelter because remember that our amphibians are in the middle of the food chain, right? So they're also going to be trying to escape from predators. So if you already have this wildlife pond rain garden, you probably already have plants that are attracting insects that our amphibians might want to eat. So I would just make sure that there are also things like maybe logs, rocks that they can hide under, leaf litter, things like that, just so they can still feel safe and confident to spend time there as opposed to feeling exposed. But it sounds like you're already on a great path towards encouraging them to come hang out in your yard.
Thanks.
Of course.
and then Kayla had a good question. Kayla, I just wanted to give a shout out, became one of our new works at Trees Atlanta on the Beltline as a supervisor, but also just became a city forest bud. So might be somebody that'd be coming to your property to help you as a coach. So congratulations there. But how much maintenance is needed for these artificial breeding habitats?
Are you referring to, I assume, the mesocosms that I showed that we have at our facility? So for those, they're actually fairly low maintenance. So I didn't include the photo of what they look like now. But the photo that I showed was when they were first constructed. Now, as soon as animals went in, mesh was added over the top. So there's actually two layers of mesh over the top. So what that does is it allows insects to come in as a food source for the animals that are living in there, but it doesn't allow predators access to them and it doesn't allow people access to mess with stuff. So we have staff that go out 2 or 3 times a week to monitor just to make sure that things aren't being messed with because people do dumb stuff. So we do sometimes have to, replace those meshes when people mess with them. We make sure that we're not winding up with like invasive plants trying to grow into them. And then occasionally we will also supplement with by adding some insects just to make sure enough are going in. But these are actually very, very self-sustaining. Just because they are outside, they're on a nature preserve. So we don't have to worry about things like chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, and there's a lot of native plant life. So we just know that there's a lot of food coming to the mesocosms just based on their presence.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question that came up, I think this is a follow-up question to the pond question. And it was regarding the frog pond, is lined or unlined best?
Yeah.
And are
So
there any best practices?
So with that, it's hard to say definitively like this is the way to do it. It's very, very situational. Because one thing we want to be mindful of if we're using a liner is, what material is that made of? Is this a liner that could potentially create some form of pollution in your water? I imagine it's possible to get pond liners that are going to be very, eco-friendly and not create that problem. But if you know, for example, that you have a neighbor nearby that sprays for mosquitoes every other week, then a pond liner might be beneficial to minimize the risk of those chemicals kind of coming in through your groundwater. So it's very, very situational to what you're looking for in your pond and what your area is. So unfortunately, that's something that I can't necessarily give a definitive answer to, but more something that would just be situational for your area.
Thank you so much. Another person said that they have a 6-foot wooden fence, and they wondered if you had any suggestions for increasing access for critters. They
Absolutely.
have a 2 by 2 inch hole on the ground, like a 2 by 2 inch hole on the ground level every 10 feet. That was a question.
Absolutely, yeah. So one good thing is with a lot of our amphibians, a 6-foot wooden fence is not going to stop them. A lot of our frogs can get over that, especially our tree frogs. Yeah, they're going up into 50-foot trees. They can get over a 6-foot fence if they want to. But when we're looking at things like salamanders and toads, you are right that if they are moving across the surface of the ground, having some kind of small holes, gaps between fence boards, a little space, where the fence maybe doesn't come all the way down, or like you were saying, maybe some small holes at various points would allow that access for them to come through. But a lot of these guys do also burrow. So even if you did nothing to your fence, some of them will still make their way in because they might just be wandering around under the ground and not even know they went past your fence. So the good news is I think that's not going to hinder amphibians as extremely as you might expect.
Thank you. And also, I just want to say that was really creative thinking about a 2 by 2 inch hole. I never would have thought of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
If I do want a pond-like area, can it be in an above ground container or is it ground level access better? How tall is too tall for the size of the pond container?
That's an excellent question. So that is a really, really good point to get into when we're talking about creating artificial ponds. Because one of the biggest concerns we have to think about, like kind of think about it similarly to you would if how you would if you were putting in a pool in your yard where you might have to worry about wildlife falling in. So the biggest thing is making sure that if animals can get in, they can also get back out. So I personally would probably err on the side of ground level or very, very slightly raised. I wouldn't recommend something that's like very high up unless you are willing to put in the effort to create ramps and steps and things like that for animals both to be able to go in and out. Because even though we are going to have animals like, tree frogs that can climb the side of, a cattle tank and climb back out, we might also see animals like, toads that, maybe they hop in over the side, but then they can't get back out, or other animals that are exploring beyond amphibians and find their way in by accident. So the biggest thing is whatever height you wind up going with, just make sure that there are both easy access points for animals to get in and get back out of your pond. So even if it's at ground level, and you've dug something into the ground, you don't want to just have an in-ground pool effectively. You want to have rocks, you want to have things going down into the water that will allow animals, whether they go in intentionally or accidentally, to escape so that you don't wind up with any instances of drownings.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Okay. So this is a question that is for the City Forest Certified program. And the question I see is, do you mind, is there overlap, example, with National Wildlife Federation or Audubon certified? And I can say Audubon or Birds Georgia and Trees Atlanta worked really closely together. So, for example, if you get the bird stewardship track with Trees Atlanta, we are supposed to be sharing that with our partners at Birds Georgia, and you pretty much qualify for their certification as well. So we have tried to work collaboratively with other certification programs. I don't know if we did it with all of them. I think this one is a little bit more tough than National Wildlife Federations. And then like I think Georgia Native Plant Societies is even tougher and more rigorous with their plants. So all of it does certainly overlap. And with our tracks, we did try to work with partners who did have a certification program as well to make sure that they align. And if you get one, you can get the other.
Oh,
I hope that is helpful.
yes. So it was specifically about, do you have any objection? Like you don't mind if a yard is already one certified, you can certify it
Oh
again?
my goodness, I think it's just wonderful to have them all. There was, I think, one of the people that we celebrated today, I believe her name was Laura or Lauren. Um, if you look at her front yard, she has everything. So, I mean, there might be every organization out there she has certified. And I think the more that you do and you can share with your neighbors, I think the better. And if you choose to do one of the partners, that's, Birds Georgia, we celebrate it. So all of it is helpful to the urban forests and all of it is helpful. So there's absolutely no problem in overlap and we encourage it. We have
Okay,
all of those partners there at the Doug Tallamy event.
awesome.
So yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. This is a question back to you, Amanda. Water aeration in an artificial pond, is it necessary?
So this is, I feel bad that I keep kind of having this answer of it being situational, but
Okay.
part of it does come back to there are just so many ways to create an artificial pond. If you are going more like truly artificial in a sense, if you're buying like one of the plastic tubs that you dig a hole for and set it down in the ground, then yes, you probably would need water aeration. But if you are creating an artificial pond that is a lot more similar to a naturally occurring pond, and you've got, your native aquatic plants and things like that. And, if you've got water input and output, then that might not be as necessary. So it really just comes down to the type of pond you're looking to build and the type of maintenance you're wanting to put into it, because there are definitely ways where, maybe it's a little bit more intensive up front to initially build your pond, but then the maintenance down the road will be much lower because you can make it kind of self-sustaining, or you can do something that's a little bit simpler up front, but then you might need more long-term maintenance, like adding in water aeration and things like that.
Thank you. Um, the last question that I see is, do you have any specific recommendations for creekside properties?
Hmm. Like for someone who already lives in a creekside property and like
I
how to,
believe so.
yeah. So in that kind of case, you're at an advantage already. If you have like, say, a small, slow moving creek, that is going to really attract a lot of salamander species. A lot of our lungless salamander species love creeks. And that's where you're going to find like a lot of our two-line salamanders and dusky salamanders. The biggest thing you just have to be aware of is, of course, the risk of pollution coming from upstream. So that is something where, if you do start to see a die off of amphibians in a creek, that can kind of clue you into maybe something's going on upstream um, that could be worth looking into. But you're definitely already at a benefit, and all the same things I've said still apply, adding native plants that'll attract insects, adding shelter for amphibians, allowing, rotting logs to stay where they are, big rocks to stay where they are, things like that, just kind of leaving that kind of creekside habitat as natural as it can be, or, if it's been altered, kind of trying to return it to what its natural state may have already been. That's the biggest thing, just making sure that there's shelter and making sure that things are going to be attracting food sources for your amphibians.
Thank you so much. And another thing I would just add or plug is we have so many, I see people on today's call from Fernbank and people who work in restoration at Trees Atlanta. And there's so many great green spaces where you can volunteer that are along creeks in Atlanta. or work with friends of groups and things like that, and continue to learn through practice some of those best practices with removing invasive species or planting around those sort of riparian areas that can help habitat. So there's a lot of great resources out here, and we feel so lucky to have been with the Amphibian Foundation and Amanda today. Again, invite you to come out to the field trip with us in a few weeks. And thank you so much for being here. This recording will be posted in about a week. And if you have any further questions, feel free to email us at education@treesatlanta.com. And thank you for filling out your survey about today's event so we can continue to improve. Thank you all for what you're doing in your time today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, everybody.